Speaking of Tep and Step, my co-host on Tep and Step, Matt Stepp, joined us earlier today to talk about his piece up on TexasFootball.com on Hot Take Tuesday, Pickle. Yeah, it's Hot Take Tuesday, where we invite a member of the Dave Campbell's Texas football staff to issue their hottest take. Today, it's Matt Stepp from the Great White North on why inner city Texas high school football is important. Here's my conversation with Matt Stepp here on Hot Take Tuesday on Texas Football Today. It's Hot Take Tuesday here on Texas Football Today, where we invite a member of the Dave Campbell's Texas football staff to issue their hottest take. And for today's hot take, we're going to the land of the cold, up north to Canada, to Windsor, Ontario, Canada, to be joined by our good friend Dave Campbell's Texas football high school football insider, Matt Stepp. Is it cold up there?
Do not besmirch beautiful Cambridge, Ontario, sir.
Oh, Cambridge.
That's right. Do not besmirch my hood.
Is it cold up there?
It's -1 Celsius. We use Celsius up here, so it's
okay. So
it's about 30.
That still means it's freezing.
It's 30. I think it's supposed to be a little warmer today, though. We're moving up. We're moving up in the world. It's springtime.
Meanwhile, it's shorts and a hoodie weather here in Texas. We've brought you on because you've got a piece up on TexasFootball.com talking about an area of Texas high school football that I think you and I both agree doesn't get talked about enough, probably for reasons that we'll get into. But your argument is that inner city Texas high school football is more important than people give it credit for. I'm interested to hear you defend that.
Absolutely. Inner city football doesn't get the best rap in the world. Part of it is because of the changing demographics of our state. People move out of the city and move into the suburbs to raise their families. They leave the city. That kind of thing. People move into the city, but it's mostly single young adults who are fresh out of college, hipster type people who don't have families and don't have kids. So the numbers in the inner city programs have dropped. The relevance on a statewide level as far as making deep playoff runs from our inner city programs isn't really there for a variety of reasons. And so people have forgotten about it, but I still feel like inner city football is really the soul in a lot of ways of Texas high school football, because these are legacy programs that have, some of these schools have been around for generations. These are schools that have been, Dallas, Woodrow Wilson, has 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Some of the schools, Houston Heights played in the first ever state championship game, UIL state championship game against Cleburne. Schools like San Antonio, Brackenridge, Austin Reagan, have Austin LBJ. A lot of those schools have long traditions that are very important to the history of Texas high school football, and I feel like it's still important to recognize those programs and recognize the brand of football that's being played, because even though these teams may not necessarily be competing for state championships, Austin LBJ being an exception last year, making their tremendous run, but these teams are still important. They still have a lot of great players, and I think the coaches in the inner cities have a much more difficult job than the coaches in these big suburban programs, because of the challenges and obstacles that they have to navigate, not only inside of the school with the limitations from a budget standpoint, the number of coaches they have and the facilities that they have, but also life for some of these kids. Some of these kids come from really difficult situations, and playing football and being a part of something bigger than themselves is really important when you look at the grand scheme of things from a societal standpoint as well.
Yeah, one thing when I was doing some thoughts on your piece after reading it on TexasFootball.com, one thing that struck me is that, let's take just 6A and 5A. That's where the majority of the inner city teams reside, are in 6A and 5A. It strikes me that if you look at the 8 finalists from this year's 6A and 5A, it is not just all, like, there's no inner city teams. That's not necessarily a surprise, but it's all suburban teams. All of them, all 8 of them, you can say are in the suburbs of, whether it's Austin, whether it's Dallas or DFW, or it's Houston. Then you add in, you even drop down to the 4A level. Argyle is decidedly a suburban school in the DFW Metroplex. They win a state championship. I mean, Carthage is obviously it's its own thing out there in East Texas, but you have to get down to there before you stop finding that suburban dominance. And so I guess my question for you is we have these inner city schools, and I think we both agree that it's important for them to recognize them. In your experience, we talked about Austin LBJ making that deep run. What does it take for an inner city school to catch that lightning in a bottle and to get hot? What is it that they need to be able to get into that contention?
I think the first thing is you've got to have the kids, right? You got to have talent. I mean, the best teams always have the talent, and you have to have a talent pool with some continuity. And typically, when you see an inner city program rise up and make a deep run, it's because they've had a group of kids that have been together for a long time, from 7th grade on up. There hasn't been a lot of movement, per se. It's much more like the suburban schools where you have a group of 7th graders that have come into the program in 7th grade and have moved all the way up through 12th grade without a lot of change. So you need that. And you need to have those 2 or 3 really special kids to kind of carry you. LBJ had that this year with Makuba and McCutcheon, those 2 big time Division I players. And then you have the worker bees around them are good players that maybe aren't the Division I guys, but are really good high school football players. We saw it a few years ago. I think it was in 2012 with Houston Lamar when they made their run to the state championship game. They had the Colbert kid at quarterback, and they had a really good crew around them. And they had a veteran head coach in Tom Nolan. LBJ had some continuity on their staff with Jamal Finner and his coaching staff. There's continuity on the coaching staff. There's continuity with the kids. And so continuity really is the key. When you combine that continuity with the talent, that's when you get the teams that can make a deep run. South Oak Cliff a couple of years ago, they had a really good crew come there. They really pushed Toledo. I believe that was a 3rd round playoff game 3 or 4 years ago. They had a really good group of kids that had come through the program. They had continuity on their staff, and they were able to make that run. So I think continuity and talent are really the 2 big factors. Continuity not only with the kids but with the coaching staff as well, because let's be honest, coaches in the inner city, a lot of them are looking to move up and go get that big suburban job where they can be completely in charge, because in an inner city ISD, you're talking about a school district with 12, 15, 20 schools. So you're reporting up to an athletic director, sometimes an area athletic director. And so there's a lot more red tape. Whereas if you're in a suburban 1 school town, the buck stops with you as far as athletics goes. So a lot of guys want to get to that point. So you see a lot more movement and guys in and out of jobs in the inner cities as well.
Before we let you go, I want to make sure we touch on this about something you said about the coaches. You said that the struggles that they go through and that their job, being a Texas high school football coach is hard wherever you are.
No doubt.
The degree of difficulty can be even increased even further at an inner city school. You're a guy who's maybe you've maybe talked to more Texas high school football coaches than anybody in America. When you talk to guys who are in these inner city schools, what are the challenges? What are the things that they talk about that are maybe unique to those jobs that people at suburban jobs don't have?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you're going to probably have fewer coaches than what you normally would work with in a suburban ISD. A lot of times, if you're at a certain size school and you're allotted 20 coaches at a job in a suburban ISD, you may only be allotted 15 jobs. In an inner city school, you're not going to have as many coaches to work with. You're not going to have as much control over who you can hire as your assistants as you would in the suburbs, because typically in the inner city schools, the principal does all the hiring. And so a lot of times, if you're stuck into a teaching, you have to have a coach who teaches this subject. You're not going to be able to pick that coach. The principal is probably going to pick that coach, and then you're kind of have to work with that coach, even though that may not be your guy, so to speak. So you have those challenges when you're building a staff. You have the challenges of from a teaching standpoint. Most inner city head coaches are in the classroom, and sometimes they're in the classroom for 4 or 5 classes a day, where you don't see that in the suburbs. In the suburbs, the head coaches almost never are in the classroom, except maybe as like an emergency sub or something. Those guys are administrators. They have administrator responsibilities, where in the inner city, a lot of those guys don't have administrative responsibilities, and they're teaching classes every day. So they're already behind from that standpoint. Then you add in the facility standpoint. COVID-19 has really hurt the inner city schools because their schools by nature are older. There's not as much room to spread out. So they had to get a lot more creative when setting up the weight rooms and the workouts and those kind of things. You go to some inner city schools and like Dallas, Fort Worth, Trimble Tech, they don't have a full 120-yard football field on campus. They have an 80-yard field they have to work with. They only have one field. You go to some of these suburban schools, they have 3 or 4 fields where they can spread out and have the JV on one side, the varsity on one side. Some of these schools don't have lights, so they can't practice after dark. There's a facilities limitation as well. And then you get into the like I said, the limitations of some of these kids, can't show up for summer workouts because they have to have jobs and those kinds of things. You get into the life situations of some of these kids where, the only meals that they know they're going to get are at school. And so some of these coaches have to make sure their kids are fed, and they have to keep peanut butter sandwiches and peanut butter and bread stocked in the field house to make sure these kids have something to eat when they go home. So there's a lot of challenges that those guys have to deal with that in more upper tier schools where there's a higher median income don't have to deal with those things.
It's Peace Up on TexasFootball.com from Matt Stepp. And I guess our overarching point, and your overarching point is when the 2021 season rolls around, make your way to one of these games.
Yeah, adopt a team. If it's your alma mater, an alma mater of your grandparents, if they, I understand you're going to go watch your team play on Friday night, and I totally get that. But those inner city games are on Thursdays and Saturdays a lot of the time. Adopt an inner city team and go watch one of their games on Thursday and Saturday night. Support those kids. Those kids, the things those coaches are doing are a lot bigger than football week in and week out, and those crowds aren't usually that big. So any extra bodies that are in the stands for those kids to support those kids and those programs are really appreciated. So my challenge is if you live in the metro area, adopt an inner city program and go watch them play on a couple of Thursday and Saturday games, or when your team has their bye week that week, go out and support those kids.
He's Matt Stepp. He's the Dave Campbell's Texas High School football insider coming to us from Canada. Stepp, stay warm.
Thank you.